So I would like to welcome you to the last day of these conferences, these workshops. And we shall be beginning with the fourth keynote speech. And it is really a great pleasure for me to introduce a good friend and excellent scholar, for whom I have a lot of respect, Rolf Strootman, who's Associate Professor of Ancient History at the University of Utrecht in the Netherlands, of course, and a former Getty Villa scholar. Professor Strootman's research and teaching focuses on empire, culture encounters, and globalization in the Afro-Eurasian expanse. This is a new term to me. I just was explaining this matter to Professor Canepa yesterday, that I am so far behind by a few centuries, particularly during the Hellenistic period. That is a time when, following the Alexander conquest, culture exchanges between East and West were especially lively, making the fluidity of borrowings and adaptation in ever greater need of explanation today. Among Professor Strootman's many valuable contributions, I would like to mention his excellent book on the role of courts and elites in the Hellenistic empires in the post-Achaemenid age, and his more recent work, The Birdcage of the Muses, that treats the subject of state patronage of the arts and sciences at the Ptolemaic imperial court. Among other works for which I have a huge amount of sympathy because we participated in it, it's a noteworthy publication in an edited volume together with our dear colleague Miguel John Verschleus on Persianism, that is a reception of all things Achaemenid in the world of antiquity. His contribution today is on Iranian office holders in the Macedonian Empire, and I would like you to join me in welcoming him. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rahim, for this very generous introduction. My presentation will continue where Matthew Canepa's presentation of yesterday left off. Not chronologically, but I hope to provide some political, like hardcore political background to the cultural interactions and the development of Iranian culture in the so-called Hellenistic period. I changed the term office holders to elites to be able to talk a little bit broader. Good? Right.
Apologies, it was in front of me.
No, not at all. It's in the program. But you always change things at the last moment. One of the things that fascinates me in this world in my work is how from the Achaemenid Empire, almost exactly and perhaps the same territory in Afro-Eurasia, this is the Achaemenid Empire, is continually a kind of political unity through the Argead Empire. And it's the same map, I just manipulated the text above there. And if you now think, why is Greece not included in the Macedonian Argead Empire of Alexander the Great and his successors? Well, then you could as well ask, why is Greece not included in the Achaemenid Empire, as it fell within the empire's stretch field of hegemony? And from the Argead Empire of Alexander and his successors to the Seleucid Empire, which we see here, a map of the different Hellenistic empires, shortly before the last period of expansion of the Seleucids in the last years of Seleucus I. This enormous landmass over there is continually a kind of a political unity for 400 years. I'll have the Seleucid Empire stop a little bit around 150. That's before they actually disappear, but that's the date more or less when the Parthians take over. And if I may briefly return to something that Robert Rollinger said in his introduction to this entire conference, when should we date the beginning of the end of the Seleucids? Is it the Battle of Magnesia, the traditional view or the conventional view? Or should we date it later? And he very kindly said that I had some good reasons to date it somewhat later. I would like to add to that, to follow up on that. that the question is, should we have the Seleucid Empire end because of Roman intervention, who around the Battle of Magnesia took away Asia Minor from the Seleucids, or should we say, and I'm in good company here, Emily Court and Susan Sherwin-White argue that as well, that the Seleucid Empire remained a superpower, controlling an empire larger than the Assyrian Empire, including Mesopotamia and Western Iran at least, and that it was the Parthian expansion who ended effectively Seleucid control of this part of Eurasia. And that's what I would argue. It's the Parthians who, when they take over Iran and Mesopotamia, Babylonia, who really create a real important watershed in world history, and not the Romans, who are not so very important for Seleucid history. Quickly continue. The main question that I hope to perhaps not answer, but address today is the question, what is the place of the Macedonian, and I take here the Argead and Seleucid empires together, in the longue durée history of Iranian imperial history? Or to put that differently, how can we bridge the gap between the Achaemenid Empire and the Arsakid Empire? This is why I made this introduction saying that the Parthians ended Seleucid rule in the east. With Alexander, we see the disappearance, or at least that has been thought in the past, of Iranian, Persian, specifically Persian elites from the area, and then they suddenly return with the Parthians. So my question is, I've dealt with that more often, what happens in the meantime? Where do these Iranian elites go after they have gone away, after they have disappeared after Alexander? Did they go underground? Well, the main thing that I will argue today will be that these Iranian elites do not disappear. They are still there. They remain important, and their importance increases during the Seleucid Empire, but also as the result of a transformation of the Seleucid Empire into a system, not entirely voluntarily, a system of indirect rule through vassal rulers or client rulers who are largely, wholly, or partly independent from the Seleucid dynasty, but who are predominantly of Iranian descent. Although we also see that in the Hellenistic period, Iranian local dynasties create Iranian identities to have a dynastic identity for themselves. I hope to address the following questions, the following subjects. I will first say something very quickly important, but that I think is very well known about the place of Iranians, Iranian nobles, and especially Persian nobles in the empire of Alexander, and a little bit his successors. Then I will say a few things which I should say about the nature of the Seleucid Empire, how it is similar but also different from the Achaemenid Empire. I will say something more about the role of the courts. My research focuses on the court, and this is also where I hope to continue things that Matthew already said yesterday. And I need the court to explain the place of Iranian elites within the Seleucid Empire, and then I quickly will say something about these cultural developments that take place. So the development of Iranian or Aranicate or Persianate dynastic identities by local rulers. Oh, and I also hope to have conclusions at the end. So first, a few words about Iranians in the Argead Empire, the Empire of Alexander, and his successors. This is a long sheet, but the main point that I want to emphasize, and there was a little discussion yesterday about this point, is that Argead Macedonia, pre-Hellenistic Argead Macedonia, and I mean even a long time before Philip II, was integrated in a Achaemenid koine of local satraps and kings and other rulers. The main peers of the Argead royal family in Macedonia are not the Greeks in the polis. That's an entirely different kind of civilization. Their peers are the other kings across or around the Aegean. So there were, even before Philip II, Achaemenid agents, perhaps even Persians, at the Argead courts. They emulated what happened in the other courts. They emulated most of all Hecatomnid royal culture. It has been argued that the Hecatomnids really provide the foundation of what we call today Hellenistic kingship. It's a very Achaemenid thing, but it's also an Aegean thing. Real Persian influence on Macedonia from Persia itself is slight, there's not much, but there is influence from this koine of courts around the Aegean. This is fairly well known. Alexander favors Persian nobles at his court to the great chagrin of his Macedonian nobles. Well, they should be angry about that, because the promotion of Iranians at Alexander's court was, of course, in part not only meant to pacify Iran and the former Achaemenid Empire, but also meant to, as a counterweight to the enormous power of the Macedonian nobility. The main adversaries, of course, of Alexander were the Macedonian nobles of the great houses who had a lot of power. And Alexander tried to counterbalance that power by promoting outsiders. But he also needed, and that's important, Iranian nobles to access the military resources of the Iranian world, which were still and remained throughout the Hellenistic period, as I will argue, remained controlled by local Iranian nobles, aristocracies. This is the locus classicus. Alexander introduces in his army, and he should have, of course, the former military power of the Persian Empire. And the point I want to make by again showing this text from Arrian is, of course, that with Iranian troops, most of all horsemen from the Iranian plateau, but also from Central Asia, and as I hope to find time to also argue, the Seleucids do the same, recruit horsemen from Media, from Central Asia, Bactria, Sogdia, recruit them for their armies, that with this this important place of Iranian military in the empire, and it's important because empires, basically, at least my empires, are basically military organizations, period. With the introduction of Iranian troops, also, am I already there? Yes, I'm already there. Iranian aristocrats enter the court. So this has been explained as Alexander's Persianizing attempts. There are other things to explain it as a counterweight to Macedonian, and etc., etc. But the point is, these people have access to the military resources of Iran. And this continues in the Seleucid Empire, although they are perhaps a little bit absent for a short while. The Seleucid Empire, I think that's the most important part to say, the most unfamiliar part here today, that I should say something about the Seleucid Empire. This is a map that shows somewhat of the. It doesn't really have borders. I think that's correct. It's a universalist empire without borders. But I always think of the Seleucid Empire not as an empire with an imperial core, although it could be argued that Babylonia and Western Iran provides a kind of a core, Syria later too, but as a system, as a multipolar system of several cores, including Babylonia, Media, which is extremely important for the Seleucids, Ecbatana, one of the main capitals of the Seleucid Empire. Susiana is an important region because it provides access to the Persian Gulf, where the Seleucids, especially later in the early 2nd century, try to retract trade to, rather than to Ptolemaic Egypt, where their rivals are. Syria is important as it provides maritime access to the Aegean and land access to Anatolia. Western Anatolia is a core region. I would also include Murth and, of course, Bactria, which is for quite a long time, not as long as the Achaemenids, one of the military powerhouses of the Seleucid Empire, until they lose control of it and then regain it, and then they lose control of it again. I take my cue from several books that inspired me. Charles Tilly's book, early modern European state formation was important when I wrote my dissertation because of his notion of entanglements of central powers and local powers, notably the entanglements of cities and monarchies. Monarchies have military power, but they need money to fund, to finance their coercive powers. Cities have that money, so there should be constant negotiations between the people who have access to resources and the imperial core, the court that needs access. Karen Barkey's book on the Ottoman Empire and Pekka, I hope I pronounce it as Achaemenid, it's a Finnish name, I think it's American, on the Comanche Empire are two of the pivotal books that are part of the imperial turn that have shown how empires can be seen as actually not territorial states, but network polities. So an empire is basically a series of networks stretching over between different dots on the map. That's also how I think of the Seleucid Empire. These are a few of the key concepts that I use in my work on the Seleucid Empire. It's multipolar, I already saw there. There's not a real core. They do not control all these deserts and steppe regions and mountains that are usually also filled in historical atlases. It's several cores connected by military routes, or routes, as Americans say. It's a network polity. It's based upon the reciprocal exchange of gifts and services, which also means that local elites have a lot of agency and a lot of power. The people who sit on the financial resources of areas, the civic elites, the people who have access to the military resources, that's more the local rural, sorry for the pronunciation, rural elites, they have a lot of power and a lot of negotiation possibilities. So I consider this empire, and I think it goes for every empire. Empires are basically negotiated enterprises. I already called the reciprocity, and resilience is an important term. The old narrative of decline and then steady decline until the empire falls. We don't really believe that empires are able to breathe. They can expand, and then they can decline and contract, and then they can suddenly expand again. And that's something that happens to the Seleucid Empire too. It first expands on the Seleucids and Antiochus, becomes a huge empire, and then it declines, it starts to contract. Local rulers become more important, and then under Antiochus III, and a little bit his successor, the second successor, Antiochus IV, the empire starts to expand again, and then it declines again. And the reason why this happens, why this second round of expansion takes place, and this I take from Karen Barkey's work on the resilience of the Ottoman Empire, that's like, 500 years continuous empire, is that they change, they shift their networks. So the traditional elites, the people with power, become too independent, so they try to find allies elsewhere. And in the Seleucid case, we can see very clearly that these Iranian nobles, who have always been there, suddenly become more important in the reign of Antiochus III. And this is partly because they gain independence, but partly because the ruler, Antiochus III, late 3rd century BCE, starts to cooperate with them more because the Macedonian nobles have become very unruly and rebellious even. I think that because of the sake of time, I will very briefly go over the role of the court. The court is central. In a network state, you need a social space, a contact zone where different elites come together. And the importance for the court in today's lecture and in my entire work is that the court is the place where different ethnic peoples meet. And Matthew Kanipa had said a lot about the agency and the importance of the court. One thing to add perhaps here is that in the Seleucid Empire, as perhaps also somewhat in the Achaemenid Empire, probably maybe also in the Parthian Empire, I'm not entirely sure there, the court is mobile. But that actually is a characteristic of all courts. Courts are not, don't have a place. They can move and they often do move. Now, the Seleucid court is one of the most mobile courts there ever was. They are entirely itinerary. This is why nobody has ever been able to identify what the capital of the Seleucid Empire was. There is no capital. The court is the center, and the court moves around. Sometimes there are two courts when there is a second king, the successor of the king. In my book, Courts and Elites in the Hellenistic Empires, I will not confront you with too much self-promotion here. I tried to reconceptualize the Hellenistic Empire as network states and show how the court is instrumental in keeping the empires, these culturally heterogeneous empires, together. Perhaps the PowerPoints can be published later, so everyone can see that. And another work that's influenced my own very much, my own book influenced myself also very much, is my dear Leiden colleague Jeroen Dijndam's book on work on court cultures, who introduced the simple term, the paradox of power. Paradox of power basically means that in order to attain power, you have to delegate power to others. So what usually happens in pre-modern societies is that there is a charismatic leader, either Alexander the Great or Cyrus or Seleucus the First, who gathers around him military leaders who follow him in return for booty, land, power, influence, status. But as soon as expansion halts, there is no longer any land or booty to distribute among them. And then you will have created an independent elite that probably will not listen to the king anymore. They will act as if they listen to the dynasty, because the dynasty is at the center of their identity, but they become entirely independent. And what then always should happen is that both at the court, things should be rearranged so that the access of the traditional, the original power holders is restricted, and find other allies elsewhere. And my argument, again, is that in the later Seleucid Empire from Antiochus III on, it starts earlier, but we see it most of all in his reign, around 200 BCE, Iranian nobles start to slowly replace Macedonians as the main agents of empire. It's very feeble. It's very much a reaction to developments that are already going on. But as I will show on a later slide, the reign of Antiochus III is a watershed because his reign starts with two huge, and I mean really enormous, revolts of his Macedonian satraps. So he defeats them, he fights his own Macedonians. That's the so-called revolt of Molon in western Iran and Babylonia. There was the revolt of Argeads in Anatolia, and after have gone to all this trouble defeating his own Macedonian elites, Antiochus I starts to work together with others. This is another map showing a little bit how it works. There are several imperial centers, satrapal capitals, those are the red dots, and a huge variety of local, non-Macedonian local courts that communicate, that come together, as this graph shows. The traveling court comes at some place, and then representatives of elites will go to the court, where I wasn't able to find a good image of a Macedonian army camp. I think this one will do. This is the army on the move, and the army on the move is the residence. This is the capital, this is the army. And everybody will go there and engage in ritualized feasting. So there is a banqueting, and it's also something that Matthew rightly emphasized. Banqueting is the core ritual at the court. And after banqueting, negotiations can commence. So, now I should quickly start a little bit later, and the clock is not running in time, say something about what this means for the Seleucid Empire. This is the theory. This was all very theoretical. I have evidence to show you that Iranian elites, perhaps not very much Persian, or Persid elites, but Iranians remain important and become more important, that it is not just a matter of increasing independence of all these kingdoms in northern Anatolia and in Iran and Central Asia. They do become independent. It is a process that has larger geopolitical causes than the Seleucids can control, but they react to it. They respond to the increasing independence of Iranian power holders by trying to reintegrate them in the empire, mainly by giving them royal titles, which will give them legitimacy, and in return, I will show some things there too. These are three books that have attempted to understand what goes on in Hellenistic Iran. That's quite a new field. Hellenistic history, or the history of the Hellenistic empires, has always focused on the West. And what we see in the Seleucid Empire, I've argued elsewhere that the Seleucid Empire is far more an Iranian empire than we tend to think. Not because the dynasty has an Iranian dynastic identity. The Seleucids don't look Iranian at all. The old cliché that the Seleucids are half Iranian because they intermarriage with Iranian dynasties, that they start with an intermarriage, means nothing as long as they do not define their own identity as Iranian, and they don't. But there are other reasons to say why the Seleucid Empire is, in many respects, an Iranian empire. Not only because this repeated intermarriage with local Iranian dynasties, but mainly because Iranian troops, because the military from Iran plays such an extremely important role in their campaigning armies. And as empires are military organizations, that means something. And it also means that although they are quite invisible, though not entirely invisible, Iranian nobles must have been present at the Seleucid court in large numbers. They come with the marriages, but they also come when armies are assembled and Iranian nobles bring their retainers, their troops, for the great campaigns. They enter the court. They are only not very visible in the Greek language sources that we depend on that we are dependent on for our narrative histories. But they are there. This is one, the army of Seleucus, which he brought from Central Asia, including mounted horsemen. I mean, how Central Asian do want to have it? With which he defeats his rivals in the West. So the idea that the Seleucids are not interested in Iran because they are entirely focused on, let's say, Europe is over there, that they are entirely focused on the West and they forget about Iran is not true. They are focused on the West because that's where their main enemies are, the Ptolemies. The history of the Hellenistic world is the history of one single conflict and a lot of conflicts revolving around them. That's the conflict between the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. So they are constantly focused on defeating the Ptolemies, but in order to defeat them, they need Iran for their military power. This is a text that Matthew already showed, how Antiochus I gave a Persian feast when he was besieging Damascus. The thing that I want to emphasize here, that he gave this feast for his army. Apparently, if this is a text that has any historicity, the Persian feast may be connected with the fact that his army is still largely Iranian. We also see it on this coinage, the famous Apollo coins that Antiochus I, the second Seleucid king, introduced, somewhat based on the older Near Eastern Iranian idea of the royal archer or the archer hero. And we think of this image, which looks Greek but has no Greek precedent, is somehow meant to also be able to speak to Iranian audiences. And coinage, of course, is meant for the army. Another thing that I could point to is these are the coins of Andragoras, if it's genuine at all. The last of a short-lived dynasty of Seleucid governors of the satrapy of Parthiana, who were Iranians. And this is before Antiochus III started to work together, or is forced to work together more with Iranian dynasties. So the reign of Antiochus III, as I said, is a watershed. He's confronted with massive revolts of Macedonians, so he fights his own aristocracy and tries to find allies elsewhere, notably in the peripheries, where these Iranian nobles apparently have not disappeared, but they are still there. But now they become more visible after, say, 200 BCE. And this is just a very good example in Polybius of how he works. These people revolt, they become independent, then the king comes along. Sometimes he does not come along, they remain independent. The king subdues them, or at least he claims to subdue them. Usually he besieges the city, is not able to take the city, then they negotiate. And then the rebel king says, okay, I will be loyal to you again. And then the great king, as Antiochus III will soon be called, will say, okay, then you will be a king. So that's the deal. This is a coin of the same king Xerxes of Armenia, who was made king by Antiochus III. And he does that in several places, incorporating rebels again by making them kings, which is, of course, very much to the benefits of these local rulers. They want independence, and now they can get independence by giving up their independence. Henk Versnel has written a beautiful article on that ambiguity. This one was... Okay, this is another example of how we find, I will hurry now, how we find in the written, even Greek sources, evidence for an increasing important, if it is really increasing, but at least for the presence of Iranian nobles in the Seleucid army and administration. And that's the same. I mean, there is no Seleucid state. The Seleucid Empire is not a state. It's a network, and all offices, if I would have talked about office holders, all offices known from the Seleucid Empire, and none of them are administrative. They are all either connected to the court or to the army, and sometimes that's the same. That's always the same. So these are just some examples. Aspasianos, the commander of Iranian troops under Antiochus IV. There's an Ardis, there's Aribazes, there are Argeads and Artaxias, commanders of the army against Rome. So they fought in Asia Minor against the Romans for the Seleucids. Governors, a governor, of course, is not only in the Seleucid Empire, but in any empire or state, a governor is a military title. We know of Iranian aristocrats being promoted to the office of governor. The governor then has to meet of, no, not him, Hyspaosines, two Greco-sized Iranian names, who founds his own Iranian dynasty in Charax, in the south of Mesopotamia. And there's, of course, much more evidence that I could show you, but I will not. Like this one, the Beestun. There's good reasons. This is a Seleucid relief. There's good reason to assume that this Heracles is also Mithra, and that the donators are probably Iranians. My last big bang to give you here is, of course, the fact that Antiochus III had two sons, gave two of his sons, when they were born, Iranian names. Mithridates is called after his maternal grandfather, and this famous son of Antiochus III, Mithridates, is the king that we know later, after he had become king, as Antiochus IV. He was originally called Mithridates. This is how Iranian, the Seleucid Empire, are. As our chair has sitting now in front of me, I don't think I have much time left here for the cultural developments. The main point here is that the conventional view that the Iranians go underground and that the Persian Revival is a reaction to Greek rule, I think that the development of Persian identity, but also of an iconography for Iranian elites, is a Hellenistic development that has something to do with the processes of transformation that take place in the Seleucid Empire. Two concluding slides. There are some continuities, because this transformation and continuity is the theme of this conference. There are dynastic marriages, like Alexander had with Iranian aristocracies, ongoing and finally increasing importance of local Iranian power holders, the employment of Iranian troops, like Alexander did, and the Achaemenids, of course, too, and Western Iran and Babylonia remain the core areas of the Seleucids until they are taken from them by the Parthians in the second half of the 2nd century BCE. But there are also important transformations. The Seleucid Empire develops from a single hyperpower, which the Achaemenid Empire was, to the Hellenistic world, to a system of competing superpower, constantly at war with each other. That's really a difference. Persia becomes less important, and it develops from attempts, and this is maybe the main point, direct rule to indirect, hegemonial control through client kings. And this system of client kingdoms remains in practice, is the basis of how the Roman Near East and the Parthian Empire are also organized. So thank you for your attention.